great to have lovely friends, isn't it? So when I go to talk to students, they ask me for career advice. And what I always tell them is what you do in school is really important preparation for your career. Because I spent my time in school running, drinking beer, and oversleeping, which was perfect preparation for Coors, Nike, and Starwood. So one of the things I get to do is advise governments about travel and tourism. And I remember one day I was visiting a country. I had meetings in the morning with the Minister of Tourism, and then in the afternoon with the Prime Minister. And my messages are almost always the same when I talk to governments. Travel and tourism can be a great vehicle for economic development. The key is to make sure that you balance infrastructure, building out attractions, you have accommodations, you make sure there's promotion, and of course you combine that with some sensible policies about visas, labor, and investment. It's pretty simple. This particular country had not enjoyed the boom in travel that we were seeing in the rest of the world, and they felt like their problem was image. And this is interesting because they had over 300 sunny days a year, they had thousands of years of history and antiquities, great cuisine, and they were close to the EU. But I don't think their problem was image. The problem was, this was January of 2011, and the country was Syria. And what was so fascinating about this is I believe the president, the prime minister, the ministers had no inkling of what was about to happen there. And to me, that was a great metaphor for how disruption and change can sneak up on us in so many different ways. In my own industry at Starwood, we saw this happen with the online travel agencies. A company like Booking.com, owned by Priceline, was worth more than Starwood, Marriott, and Hilton put together. And Airbnb, by the time it was the age of your average second grader, had more listings than those three companies had rooms. So I became a student of disruption, actually ended up writing a book about it. And what I want to do today is talk a bit about disruption as I saw it in the corporate world and happening globally and how that might relate to wellness. And let me start with a definition of disruption, and this is my own. It's basically this. It's when you wake up and you realize you're in deep trouble, and you either didn't see the change coming or you saw the change coming and you didn't do something about it. Now, I believe we're living, by the way, in the age of disruption. And I don't think it would be a surprise to any of you if I said to you that technology, digital technology, is the catalyst for that change. But it is worth thinking a little bit about why that's true. And I think there are three basic reasons. The first is just orders of magnitude improvement. I mean, computers have improved in performance and in cost effectiveness over the course of my lifetime by like 1 billion-fold. Okay? If air travel had done that since the Wright brothers, we could get back and forth to Beijing in a few seconds, and it would cost us a few cents. The second thing is what I call the general purpose effect. So if you think about it, the ability to store, share, and manipulate information can help pretty much any human activity. From launching satellites to ordering groceries, from cryptocurrencies to finding your next date, right? It's absolutely important to everything we do. And then finally, there's something called the network effect. And I think of it this way. If I have a phone and nobody else does, it's pretty worthless. But if everybody has a phone, it's indispensable. Now, it used to be that physical networks were extraordinary barriers to entry. They were great winner-take-all, really profitable businesses. But suddenly you get the internet, which is really a network of networks and gives everybody access. So I launched my book last January, and I was thrilled because Jim Cramer asked me to come on Mad Money to talk about my book. I was self-publishing, talking about disruption. I couldn't quite go to those old publishing houses, right? But I was thrilled to get 200,000 viewers hear me talk about the book. Well, I launched my book on LinkedIn at the same time, and within 2 weeks, I had 100,000 views. I didn't need a media company to get my word out anymore. And what I think is an interesting paradox here is, with all this advance in technology, you would think companies would be even more profitable and more successful. But speaking of wellness in a weird sense, the average life expectancy today of S&P 500 companies is about 15 years, and that's down from about 50. So why is it that companies struggle so much with disruptive change? Why is it the startups and the new companies that are taking over? And I think there are a few basic reasons for that. The first is self-interest. And some of this is really blatant, right? It's tobacco companies telling us it's not unhealthy to smoke, or fossil fuel companies telling us not to worry about climate change, or one of my favorites in an industry closer to mine, taxi drivers in Paris slowing traffic down to a snail's pace, literally Operation Escargot, to protest against Uber. Another barrier is a little bit more tricky, and that's what I call change blindness. You see, when I was in college, my economics professors told me, you know what, you should think of firms and people as information-seeking, utility-maximizing, rational decision makers. Have you ever actually met someone like that? Right? So behavioral economics come along and they tell us, you know, actually, people are not just irrational, they're predictably irrational, right? And by the way, this is something we already kind of knew. I mean, people were in marketing or magicians or sales managers, they already knew this, right? I mean, why else would people smoke or buy $4,000 handbags or run marathons? Right? So, but the fact is, it's very easy for us not to see what's happening around us. We seek confirmation of what we already believe and look for facts that support that. We love to believe what people we like and relate to can believe. That's why I believe, by the way, they call it Fox and Friends, not Fox and Facts. And the best one is we overestimate our abilities, right? We overestimate our ability to understand what's going on. So it's like that study, 80% of French men believe they're above average lovers. This is actually true. Now, here's the really sad part. Don't you feel sorry for that 20% who don't think that? Okay, so we've got these tremendous barriers. The other is we have entrenched habits, right? Companies are very successful because they've learned to do a few things very, very well. Their systems, their rewards, the kind of people they choose, everything about them is built towards doing one thing extremely well. And suddenly you're changing everything on us? So there's no wonder that companies are facing so much challenge today from disruption, right? And it's a pattern we've seen over time. And if you go back to the 19th century, people who were making sailing ships for cargo kept thinking they could outdo steam, right? They spent 100 years trying to make faster and faster sailing ships. How about Detroit with Japanese cars in the 70s, right? Or Big Foundry Steel with steel mini mills. Not a single Big Foundry Steel company ever made a mini mill, and they all went bankrupt. Think about Blockbuster, Toys R Us. They all woke up and had their Kodak moment, right? And I don't mean right? They're gone. So now you're asking yourself, but we're at the Global Wellness Summit. What does this have to do with wellness? Well, I think it has everything to do with wellness because I think the age of disruption is having a huge impact on wellness, right? Do we really know what it means for our health to be always on in today's economy? Or think about what disruption is doing to people's jobs, or whether they even have jobs now. Or the fact that the age of disruption is happening at the same time as global development. And more output means more stress on our planet. So today, there are more climate refugees than there are political ones. And here's another paradox, right? Because we have advancing technology, you would think that the rate of increase in longevity would be increasing, but it's actually slowing down. And I think more and more people are waking up to that same personal health disruption moment where they realize they're burned out, they're depressed, or they're just sick. And I think the reality is the same barriers that companies face in disruption, people are facing as well, right? Think of it, self-interest, right? What is big pharma and big food not telling us or telling us that they shouldn't be? What about the fact that we're also change blind about our own health? We ignore signs about what's happening to our bodies because that's how people work. And also, I mean, this is the easiest one. How about entrenched habits? We have all kinds of habits that aren't necessarily ones that are going to make us more healthy, right? So the opportunity here, by the way, is just like with companies, is to take control, to realize we can control our own destiny. We can recognize what's happening and do something about it. And I do think there are some lessons that we can take from companies that have done a really good job of this. And I'll use one company as an example of this. It's related to wellness. It's a Dutch company called Royal DSM. Anybody heard of it? I thought so. It's good thing I'm talking about it then, right? So this is a company that's a 10 billion euro life sciences and specialty materials company that started life as a state-owned coal mining company. And not only has it made that transition and done well in terms of its stock performance, but when Fortune listed the 50 global companies changing the world, it was not only on that list, it was number 2 on that list after JP Morgan and ahead of some tech company in California, I think called Apple. So there is hope. There are ways for us to think about disruption and take control of our destiny. And what I want to do is share with you some of the lessons that I share with senior managers as they think about disruption and try to tie those back to wellness. And the first couple of these really relate to how do we overcome our own cognitive bias? And I think the best way to do that is to challenge your views by seeing what people say and do from places and from things that aren't like yours. So when I was CEO of Starwood, we woke up one day and we realized 35% of our growth was coming out of China. So we're running a company in a boardroom in Connecticut with nobody who's Chinese, nobody who speaks Chinese, and a bunch of people who don't actually really like to go to China. So just to make myself popular with people like Mia, what did I do? I said, great, guess what? We're all going to move our corporate headquarters to China for 6 weeks. And we're not going to do it because we want to oversee what they're doing, because they're doing a great job. We're doing it so we can learn what they need from us to be even more successful. What I didn't expect is we learned things that made us better globally. For example, in China, people were already starting to book their rooms online with their mobile devices. It wasn't something we were seeing yet in Europe and North America, but we started building it for China, so when that happened in North America, we were ahead of our competitors. Another way to get yourself out of your own way of thinking is to look and combine what I call old and new skills. So when I talk to students, I tell them, you know what, this is probably the best time in history to be young and starting your career. I mean, nobody literally has 20 years of social media experience. So you're going to know more than the people you're working for when you start. I mean, it's a great thing, right? So these new skills are all about getting technology to do things for us that we had to do ourselves before. The old skills are really all about getting people to do things and work together. So the new skills can help us do things like design products, optimize price, figure out who to call on with what. But it's the old skills that inspire people, that build relationships, and that close the sale. So the key is to bring both of those things together. Now, what does that have to do with wellness? Well, I think it has a lot to do with wellness because, by the way, it's combining the old and new skills that will make us more healthy. And I think of the old skills as basically my 5 pillars for living well. And this is my own simple-minded view of things, but it relates to this. First, eat a plant-based diet, get regular exercise, do purposeful work, have a sense of community, and embrace new things. Those, to me, are the old skills. That's price of entry, great stuff to make sure that you live well. And by the way, so many of our diseases, as we learned today, are related to lifestyle. But the new skills are about embracing new technology and understanding the solutions that are coming to us and incorporating those two things as well. And I skipped over something before. The advantage of having a global outlook when it comes to wellness is looking at how people live in other parts of the world and what they do that we can learn from. So if you're based in America and you think your default for commute has to be driving a car, look at Copenhagen and Amsterdam, where 50% of commutes are by bicycle. There is a better way. Another source of disruption, another thing I talk to companies about, is the focus on personalization. And the story goes something like this. The Industrial Revolution is really what created these large enterprises that we call companies and corporations today. They were built for scale, they were hierarchical, they were centralized, and they produced large volumes of undifferentiated products. Now, what happened was people got more sophisticated, media fragmented. We could start targeting products at different consumers, and companies had to rethink their production to be more market-oriented. And then along comes the internet, and suddenly what you find out is the way you operate matters to your consumers too. If people don't like what you're doing in a factory over here on this side of the world, they won't buy your product on that side of the world. So again, suddenly the market is telling you how to operate your company. Now we live in an area of personalization, right? We expect companies to not only know us, but know where we are and what we want and what we're going to want. If you're going to do that, you need a company that's what I call a horizontal learning organization, which is really just kind of management speak for saying senior management should not be making the decisions anymore about what we do and how we do it. Our customers should be doing that. You buy a Tesla, that car gets made better after you bought it based on input from owners and software upgrades that come in through the internet, right? So there's a change, and most companies can't deal with that. If you think about it, this has a direct relationship to wellness as well, because even though we're all, 99.8% similar genetically, those small differences in base pairs, those different experiences we had when we were young, the choices we're making now, I mean, we're all going to die at different ages of different things. So personalization is clearly going to be important as we think about wellness into the future. So here's another one. I've been talking to you so far about how organizations hate change, and it's true. But I think people actually like change. I think it's a fallacy to say that people hate change. I mean, as consumers, we love innovation if we have control, right? We can decide whether or not to buy something. Now, I hate change when my iOS devices get updated and suddenly I can't figure out how my email works because I don't have control, right? So it's about control. The other thing is, there's a whole slice of humanity that will die for change. They're called revolutionaries. And why do they do that? Because they believe in a purpose. So if you're leading an organization and you want to get people to embrace change, talk about what's happening in the world, what it means for the purpose of our company, and what you need from people to make it happen, and make them co-authors of change. Well, the same thing's true in wellness, right? It sounds trite to say, but we're all chief executives of our own lives, right? We can make choices about what we want to do. We can be the author of the change that we want to have. All right, so the last one relates to this. It's something I call less planning, more strategy. So long ago, I was the head of strategic planning at Nike, and we talked about that as though it were one thing. But strategy and planning are actually two different things. Planning is what hierarchical, centralized companies do to make sure that over 5 years, our revenue is going to grow by this much, we're going to open that factory, and we're going to launch these 2 product lines. The world doesn't work like that anymore. Strategy is about answering questions like, what are we about? What are we going to do to keep disruptors from getting between us and our consumers? What are we going to do to make sure that we have the best possible company we have for what we try to do? And we heard a great example of that this morning, and I think this relates directly to wellness when you think about the breakers, right? What have they done? They focused on wellness, associate engagement. That engagement leads to higher guest satisfaction. That higher guest satisfaction leads to more profitability. You don't need a 5-year plan to do that, right? It's that focus on what really matters and taking control and doing that. So, as a closing thought, I want to just leave you with a few key points. We're living in the age of disruption. It can be very threatening both to the companies we work for or with, as well as to our wellness. But we absolutely can take control of our destiny. And so I'll leave you with this twist on an old adage, and that is, the new definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting the same result.